It started with my wife. My wife loves coffee, but she got to the point where it was making her sick. She would drink coffee for a few months and then would just complain about so many issues, achy joints, headaches, uncomfortable feeling. She would go off coffee and quit for a few months, and that was not a good thing. She really enjoyed her coffee. And
the Texas Hill Country is one of the most beautiful places on earth. In this podcast, recent Hill Country resident Tom Fox visits with the people and organizations that make this one of the most unique areas of Texas. Join Tom as he explores the people, places, and their activities of the Texas Hill Country.
For another episode of the Hill Country Podcast. And as I always say, it's either a virtual cup of coffee with Tom or a live cup of coffee with Tom. Today it's live because we're back at Starbucks and I have Jody Dyer, and he's a coffee aficionado. So it's going to be about coffee. So Jody, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to be here.
Jody, could you tell us a little bit about your professional background over the years?
Certainly. I was a school teacher for 17 years. Most of that spent in middle school, 6th grade. Then made a change and got into the commercial insurance business with a buddy of mine for a number of years. Our specialty was contractors. Most of my clients were plumbers, actually, for years. And now I'm semi-retired, still involved in that some, but kind of got into the coffee roasting business, enterprise, and spend most of my time doing that right now.
Where'd you teach?
I taught in California, Southern California.
What subjects?
English and history, primarily. And I married a Texas girl years ago. She grew up in Midland, my wife Martina, and we moved to Texas in 2008, so we've been here for some time now.
Well, you have Courthouse Coffee Roasters.
Yes.
I think that's right. So tell us, how did you get into the love and world of coffee?
Well, it started with my wife. My wife loves coffee, but she got to the point where it was making her sick. She would drink coffee for a few months and then would just complain about so many issues, achy joints, headaches, uncomfortable feeling. She would go off coffee and quit for a few months, and that was not a good thing. She really enjoyed her coffee, and so I like solving problems anyway, and decided, well, there's got to be somehow there's got to be a way to produce coffee that my wife can drink without having issues. So just started doing that. I learned about a lot of the health benefits of fresh coffee, which got me excited. I knew nothing about coffee to begin with, and learned that coffee you typically buy in the stores is stale and typically months old. And so started roasting coffee at home, and from the very start, my wife could drink the coffee I roasted. And so I began trying to figure out what the difference was, and discovered primarily that the issue was hydrogen sulfide residue in coffee. So that's not a common thing, but coffee that's roasted commercially is roasted using propane or natural gas, and in the combustion process, coffee is typically roasted in a drum roaster, and those beans roast in that gas exhaust, and there's a residue that's left in the beans, and it's water soluble, so when you brew your coffee there are trace amounts of that, and for some people it's not an issue at all, but for a number of people it's a problem. It makes them sick, basically. And so that's what prompted this. I started roasting coffee for my wife. Once we discovered that, I knew I was roasting coffee for the rest of my life. Started giving it away to friends just for fun and other family members, and had such a demand for coffee that I finally broke down and bought a larger commercial roaster, and I've been doing this. Our roaster is an air roaster that runs on electricity, so there's no gas used. So the coffee's clean, no hydrogen sulfide residue in it, and my wife can drink it without any problems. And we've heard that from a lot of people who buy our coffee, tell us that, share that with us. They can drink our coffee where they can't drink other coffee.
So lots to unpack there. Do you know what the term ESG is?
No.
All right. Well, it's environmental, social, and governance. It's a buzzword in the corporate world. So
yes.
You are actually doing great on the E part, the environmental, by using an air roaster. So
yes.
We're going to highlight that because a lot of my listeners really are very much focused on ESG. But what I wanted to ask is, what amount or what quantity can you roast accurately, safely, and effectively with an air roaster?
Well, my air roaster, I can roast a maximum 10 pounds at a time, 10 pounds of green coffee at a time. I typically roast a little less than that. I'll usually roast 7-8 pounds at a time. So we're very much a micro roaster. It's a challenge to roast large quantities, which you would need to do if you had a large commercial operation doing this. Although the technology is changing, there are some companies that are working on this. Air roasting has become a little better known, a little more popular in recent years because the coffee is so much better. But typically, a large air roaster, many of them still run on gas, or they do that. So you don't often see them run on electricity. Usually, the smaller roasters run on electricity. But it's definitely a small batch proposition.
So we met at the Kerrville Farmers Market,
yes.
And you were out, you and your wife were out there selling coffee, and you took some time to explain to my wife and myself what a air roasted bean should look
yes.
like. Could you describe that for us?
Yes, certainly. Air roasting is different. It uses convection to roast the beans. So the beans basically float in the air the entire time they're being roasted. In a drum roaster, conventional drum roaster, you have conduction, so the beans hit hot metal, and that heat can affect the flavor of your beans. So an air roaster, the beans roast evenly, and the coffee just has a smoother taste to it typically. So that's become known. So you do have more people are roasting now, but it's unusual to find somebody who's air roasting without the gas in small quantities, without the hydrogen sulfide residue. But it does make a better tasting cup of coffee, a smoother cup that's noticeable.
So you have a website, courthousecoffeeroasters.com, and we're
yes.
going to link to that in the show notes. But you've got some great information, and perhaps my favorite part, other than you and your wife's story, is Coffee 101. So
yes.
I was wondering if you could give us a primer on Coffee 101.
Certainly. Ask me anything I leave out here, but coffee, there are basically two types of coffee. This is interesting to me, that are grown and roasted commercially. You have Arabica coffee and a Robusta coffee. Robusta coffee has about double the caffeine content of Arabica coffee. It's commonly used in blends. It's lower quality, it's cheaper. Arabica coffee is the better tasting coffee. It's higher quality coffee. It's a little harder to grow, but if you're drinking quality coffee, it's going to be Arabica coffee most of the time. And there's a difference between commodity coffee, which is what you buy at the grocery store, it's traded on the commodity exchanges, and specialty coffee. And specialty coffee is it's more expensive, typically costs 2 to 3 times the price of commodity coffee. But specialty coffee has become a thing, and really specialty coffee just means that it's coffee that's cultivated and harvested and processed and roasted with extra care. The farmers, our favorite coffee that we typically roast and sell is from Honduras. The farmers make much more money on specialty coffee because they take the extra care to grow it and process it carefully. Even little things like when they pick the cherries, specialty coffee is hand-picked, and they pick only ripe coffee cherries. Commodity coffee, sometimes they'll just pick everything they have, and so you have unripe cherries, coffee cherries mixed in with ripe cherries, and that of course affects the flavor. But then in every step, the way it's harvested, the way it's processed, our coffee from Honduras is wash processed, so it's nice and clean. It's mechanically dried, and so the coffee is a higher quality green coffee to start with. But then that's carried on. Ideally, specialty coffee is roasted carefully, and it takes. I don't think it's rocket science, but it takes a little bit of care to do that. I especially like the way we're able to roast, because I can roast to temperature with my air roaster. I can roast to temperature, so I can roast my beans to exactly my Honduran I roast to exactly 442 degrees Fahrenheit, and I can precisely duplicate my roast every time, so the coffee is consistent, which is a big deal. You don't want to have somebody get a really good bag of coffee one week and then the next week they come back and then it's different. So there's a lot of consistency that you can achieve with an air roaster, I think. And specialty coffee is just it's really good coffee, and once you get used to it, you kind of get spoiled. Honestly.
Amen to that. Amen to that. How did you learn about sourcing coffee, and how has your journey on the sourcing part of your business sort of evolved as your business has evolved?
Well, really just doing research. When I started roasting coffee, when I started at the very beginning, I just got a hot air popcorn popper and did that in the kitchen, and then traded up, grew up to a small kitchen roaster, which was gave me a little more precise roast. But in the whole process, I just would try different coffee, and I was really trying to find coffee that my wife liked. So I would try green coffee from different importers, from different coffee brokers, which are available online. You can buy green coffee easily online. And I found that some coffee was better than others. My wife liked some coffee, didn't like others. And really in that process, learned that there's a difference between importers and green coffee you can buy. And I found a particular source that a broker in Pennsylvania, and they just had especially clean coffee, and they had a variety that I couldn't find anywhere else, and I kind of stuck to that, and it was from the start our favorite, and my wife liked it the best, and then learned from there. So it's fair trade coffee, which is good standard. The farmers get a fair price for that. So typically we purchase fair trade coffee, or also direct trade coffee if we can get it. Direct trade is where you're purchasing directly from the farmer, typically through an importer. That's sometimes harder to find. I found some wonderful Haitian coffee that's direct trade that we roast when we can get it. But just learned that really specialty coffee is not only does it produce a better product in the end for the consumer, but it's much better for the farmers in places like Honduras and Guatemala, and we typically most of our coffee comes from Latin America. Central America has really been kind of our favorite place to find coffee.
So you've actually now moved from the E in ESG to the S in ESG, which is sustainable, and that's with the fair trade coffee and the direct trade coffee. Mm-hmm. So kudos. You've now had 2 of 3. I'm going to assume you have good corporate governance because it's you and your wife.
Yes.
So great leadership at the top is critical. What's the role of altitude in coffee bean production? I've been to a couple of coffee farms. They tend to be higher up. What's the role of altitude?
Altitude, typically the higher the altitude, or a coffee that's grown at higher altitude, is typically better quality than coffee grown at lower altitude. So most of your specialty coffee is grown at higher altitude, and the way the beans are grown and the rate of growth and the rate of ripening, it affects the flavor. So typically you're going to have better quality, better tasting coffee grown at higher altitudes as opposed to down low, and that's a factor. But the interesting thing about coffee is everything affects it. There are 1,000 variables in all of this. So you can have wonderful, high-quality coffee grown in the shade, which is typically higher quality, at high altitude, and if it's not harvested properly, or if it's not processed properly, you can ruin it. If it's not roasted well, you can damage your coffee. If it's not brewed well, you can damage your coffee. You can kind of waste it that way, I think. But yes.
So how does, or what's the difference between a coffee that's seen as relatively mild as opposed to one that may be stronger? Is there a difference in the bean? Is it the production process?
There are a number of things. Really, the biggest issue with strength is the amount of coffee. So a lot of people will tell me, they'll say, I like strong coffee. I want a strong coffee. And really the way you determine that is how much coffee you use when you're brewing your coffee. So there are different things that affect the flavor, but really a coffee bean is going to, a particular variety of coffee from a certain region, whatever, is going to have an optimal kind of a sweet spot where you roast it to. So the coffee that we like, our Honduran, I typically I call it a medium or medium dark roast. I roast it to the very beginning of second crack. When you roast coffee, as it evaporates, it cracks one time, and then you'll have a pause and it'll crack again, and you stop the roast wherever you want. Anytime after first crack, it's consumable. But you want different coffees will have optimum flavor at a certain spot in that roasting process, so that affects the flavor too. So with our coffee that we typically sell, I think we found the sweet spot there. It brings out the maximum flavor, the depth of body and flavor in that coffee. But then from there, how you brew it affects that. So as far as strong coffee, the amount of coffee you use, the grind you use, my favorite way to brew coffee is with a French press, coarse grind French press, 4 minutes exactly. But you can use a drip coffee maker and use pour over. You can use different ways to brew coffee, and it all affects the flavor. I can take the same coffee and brew it in an AeroPress, and it'll taste different. It'll be a different cup of coffee, basically. But
so, do you have various strengths available for sale?
It's there's no change in the strength. The strength is determined by the brewing process, really. So our Honduran coffee that we typically sell at the farmers market, it's all roasted the same. It's roasted to a medium dark roast, all roasted to 442 degrees exactly. And if somebody wanted a different tasting coffee, probably a different variety. I've roasted some really good Guatemalan coffee that some of our customers like. That's a little lighter, I would say, a little more fruity. Coffee has different notes to it. So a lot of our Honduran coffee definitely has a chocolate note to it. I'm not a coffee snob at all. I'm okay with putting cream coffee, a little cream and honey in our Honduran coffee, and it's almost like hot chocolate. They're just chocolate notes that really come out, nutty flavors. Our Guatemalan that we've roasted is a little fruitier, a little lighter. Somebody would probably say it's not as strong, but again, you can brew it to the strength you want. Our Haitian coffee that we've roasted some, I think almost has cinnamon notes to it. It's different, but just really delicious. So really the different types of coffees where you get the different flavors, as opposed to having one coffee that you roast to different levels. You can do that, and a lot of people ask for that, but we try to optimize each particular coffee. I try to roast it to what I think is the best level for it.
So about I was always a kind of a dark roast, double strength drinker, and about 5 years ago, I found my stomach couldn't tolerate that. So is that something similar to you found with your wife, or perhaps something else going on?
I think that's the biggest factor. There are other things that can determine that. I think if coffee is over roasted or burnt, I think it affects the flavor. Some people like it that way. I think the hydrogen sulfide is really the primary factor that causes problems for people in coffee. There's been some talk about mold. Some folks are concerned about that. That's been kind of controversial. There's some that say, that's more of a marketing thing. I know that the coffee we get is extremely clean. I've noticed that more so than other coffee. I don't think there's any mold issues, but there's no way to know that unless you test it. But there's some people that would say that's a factor too. I think really the hydrogen sulfide is the biggest factor, and I think probably we get less tolerant to that as we get older. My wife didn't have any issues with coffee until probably 6-7 years ago, and then all of a sudden it was a problem for. So I think that's probably the biggest factor, honestly, for folks.
I also had to cut back from 12 cups a day to 3, so maybe that had something to do with it.
That might have something to do with it, yes.
Let me ask you this question, because this is probably the first question I asked you when I met you at the farmer's market, and it's the name of your company, and then you have a great picture of a classic Texas courthouse on your bags of coffee and on the website. So tell us about the name Courthouse Coffee Roasters.
Okay. We get that question often. We're here in Kerrville, and people look at our logo and our label, and they say, "That's not the Kerr County Courthouse. What's the story here?" And we have recently moved here. We bought a house here in this last August, but we've lived in the Gatesville area, Courthouse County, previously, and the picture on our label is the Courthouse County Courthouse. And when we first started roasting coffee, when I bought my commercial roaster and started doing this actively, we set up a roaster in an old building, 100-year-old brick building across the street from the Courthouse County Courthouse. I could literally step around the corner and I could hit the courthouse with a baseball if I needed to. And so the name just fit, and moving here, the name stuck. It just, we liked the name, and so we're Courthouse Coffee Roasters, and at some point we thought we might feature various courthouses across the state of Texas on our label, because of course that's a very Texas thing, and we like that. But that's why we are Courthouse Coffee Roasters. We started roasting coffee across the street from the courthouse in Gatesville, Texas.
Well, as every Texas lawyer knows, there are 254 courthouses in Texas, because there are 254 counties, and there are some glorious examples of just courthouses built from the late 1890s up until the now 2020s.
Yes.
What brought you all to Kerrville?
We've always liked this area, but we have a family ranch in Junction. My wife's sister, it's in my wife's family, and my wife's sister managed it for years, and she passed away a couple of years ago. She had leukemia, and my wife was caring for the ranch and helping her with all of that. And so we were just spending a lot of time down here in Junction. And looking ahead, we thought, okay, we're at some point we're going to have to retire here. Where are our kids likely to wind up? And we've always liked Kerrville, and so we decided to go ahead and buy a house in Kerrville. So this is, we're back and forth between Junction and Kerrville. I'm here a lot now, roasting coffee more than I thought it would be, but we are, we're here now. So we love Kerrville. It's a great town. We've always liked it. When we first got married, we almost moved here initially, and so we're here now. We like it, and we're happy. And we actually found a great church here. That was one of the confirming things. With we're happy with Kerrville, so we like it here.
You actually moved to Kerrville after we did. We moved in April. We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary of being in Kerrville. So I'm always intrigued about what brought people to Kerrville, Texas.
Yes.
So tell us if someone wanted to check out you guys, or maybe purchase some coffee. Obviously, we met at the Kerrville Farmers Market, but there are other ways to purchase the coffee. How would they go about doing so?
Well, they can go online, visit our website, courthousecoffeeroasters.com. We do a subscription service, so we actually ship coffee to people all over the country. We ship it to Michigan and California and Tennessee and other places. So that's one way. You just go on and you can either buy the bag one time, or you can subscribe and get a shipment of coffee every month. If you're local, you can come visit us at the Kerrville Farmers Market. We are at the Friday evening market. There are two different farmers markets here in town. So we're at the Friday evening market on Water Street downtown, and that's a good way. And we also do, and much to my wife's insistence, you can sample our coffee. So we always have tasting coffee at our table, so you don't have to buy anything that you can't taste first. So we do that, and that's probably, if you're local, that's probably the best way to find us for now. And
well, Jody, First of all, I have sampled the coffee because I did that at the farmer's market, and I actually bought some. I've been saving it. We're going to take a little trip, so I wanted to wait until I could have it fresh. So I haven't tasted it yet, but if you haven't been to the farmer's market, check it out. It's a ton of fun. It's just a nice little Kerrville event every other Friday, I think.
No, it's every Friday.
Every Friday now.
Every Friday, 4 to 7.
4 to 7.
4 p.m.
And this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with me. We're going to put your website on our show notes, so hopefully some of our folks will get in contact with you, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate being here.
This is Tom Fox. I love telling stories, and the Hill Country Podcast is designed to do just that. If you have a story you'd like to tell, I'd love to sit down and visit with you. Please contact me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com, and I'll sit down and visit with you for an episode of the Hill Country Podcast. The Hill Country Podcast is designed to tell the people, places, and things that make this the most unique part of Texas. The Hill Country Podcast is a production of Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to visiting with you